So if you're a young man with a bonny maid to woo, be careful with the vows you make and who you make them to. For wicked girls will weave a web, be sure you don't get caught, lest you find yourself one day beneath the family plot. Hey guys, my name's Anne, and today we'll talk about The Family Plot by Cherie Priest. Our protagonist is named Talia Taunton. Her father is thrilled when the esteemed Augusta Withrow enters his office and offers him a deal. His company is supposed to take over and liquidate her massive family estate. So he gives the job to Dahlia, who brings together a crew, mostly family members, and they head off to the Withrow estate. The old Victorian Withrow house is to be demolished. So Dahlia and her crew are supposed to hollow out the place of anything of value they could find and sell it so they could save their family business. So they set off to the old place to see what they can find, and at first Dahlia despairs at ripping off the house, but she has no other option. So Dahlia is a weird woman who speaks to old houses. She's been doing this for years. At every place they had to demolish, to every place they had to rip out, she would go there and speak to the houses. But now, for the first time, the house speaks back. And that's how you know the place is haunted. And soon enough, Dahlia and the whole crew start seeing ghosts around the house. At some point, they find a family plot in the backyard, and they call Augusta Withrow to ask her, what's that about? And she assures them that there's no one buried there. It was just an old Halloween prank by her father, who used unclaimed tombstones for this prank. Very funny, Mr. Withrow. However, one of the crew members is pretty sure he saw a ghost the other day, so he digs up the graves and he finds a body. And so begins the investigation of what happened in this house. Any ideas? So this book confused me a bit. It was very fun to read, but it was also not very scary, which is what you'd expect from a horror book. In my opinion, ghost stories ought to be scary. They ought to have the right atmosphere to provide the level of terror for the story to be efficient. And this didn't have the right atmosphere. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed reading this book. It just lacked the right atmosphere. So the ghost story was pretty intriguing, but also pretty plain. If you know what I mean, you probably don't. It seems, for starters, let's start with the ghost. It seems the ghost was fixated on Dahlia, and she was the one targeted mostly by the paranormal activity. And the only reason the book gave later was that the ghost empathized with Dahlia because they had both been wronged by a man, just like every other living creature on this planet. I'm kidding. Just kidding. This reasoning, however, for Dahlia being targeted throughout the entire book, was not very well delivered. So, in my opinion, it was a little bit weak. And something that really bothers me are stupid characters. Okay, just like in Cannibal's Creek, where everyone made all the wrong decisions. In this book, well, they weren't stupid. for one, they were pretty clever. But they kept dismissing all the signs that they should leave the house. Like, Dahlia almost died in the shower. Okay, let's get over it. We gotta, like, demolish the house tomorrow. They're trapped inside. They're trapped inside the house with a ghost, and they see a storm coming, and they don't leave. And also the fact that Augusta Winthrop told them that nobody's buried in the family plot, and yet they find the bodies, and then they find some old pictures, and when they look through them, they recognize all the faces as the ghosts they've been seeing around the house. So, like, there are so many clues out there that told them, you know, like, you should leave now. It's, like, dangerous. Although I don't think anyone was really in danger. Anyway, they didn't leave, and all the signs were there. They knew something terrible was about to happen, and they decided to continue working. And so this leads us to our main question. Why are characters in horror stories dumb? Due to the lack of atmosphere, the story wasn't as terrifying as it wanted to be. And that, for me, is a major fault. Also, the character's backstory was lacking. We didn't know anything about them, so we couldn't empathize. It made it very hard for me to care. Dahlia was fun to read through her thoughts. She had some very funny thoughts. I found her funny, but also that was her entire personality. She was funny, just funny. And heartbroken by her ex. That's the only thing Dahlia was. And the rest of the crew, we know nothing about. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there was no real danger, and nothing happened to anyone in the entire book. I must say, though, that this book had great imagery. The house, the action, the dialogue, everything was described vividly. The writing was simple and fun and very effective. And I listened through the biggest part of the book. I listened the audiobook of it. And I really enjoy listening to audiobooks while baking and cooking. So even though, like, it wasn't exactly what I expected it to be, I would definitely recommend this book if you're in for a fun ghost story. But in my opinion, ghost stories aren't supposed to be fun, but it's kind of frustrating for me. It's why I gave it 3 stars. But other than that, it was a good book overall. Just not scary at all. So let's talk about the fun element in horror stories. Should horror stories be fun? That's a very interesting question. If you have any ideas, I'd love to know them. Okay, that was a combination of like and love. But here's my thoughts on it. Yeah, let's talk about it. You probably know Casper, the friendly ghost. I grew up with his adventures, but since he's a ghost, I would safely argue his show was about a ghost story. That was my first encounter with fun ghost stories. I think I can't remember when they switched and all of a sudden ghost stories couldn't be fun anymore. Like when you're kids, you have all these fun TV shows, these cartoons, like Casper, like Scooby-Doo. Is Scooby-Doo still around? I don't know. Yeah, and you have all these ghosts and monsters and vampires and they're all fun. And then suddenly you grow up and you expect them to be scary and not fun anymore, like I do now. And I know what most of you will say, that the family plot was written for it to be scary and not fun. But what can I say? I just don't scare easily. And the way Dahlia and her thoughts made me laugh, with a combination of the lack of atmosphere, the lack of ghostly atmosphere, put it better, made it all the more fun to read. I don't think this is entirely negative. Don't get me wrong. There is a great amount of taboo and stigma surrounding horror stories for some inexplicable reason. And a fun horror book might be the way to change people's minds. I once told a friend of mine, okay, we're not really friends, an acquaintance of mine. He's a movie director, and I told him that I love horror movies a lot, and he looked at me as if I was an alien. And he said, I don't like them at all. I think they are disgusting and messed up, and that they have nothing to offer. And I asked him which horror movies he's watched, and he said none, because they're disgusting. So he doesn't watch horror movies, but he has a very strong opinion about horror movies. So I find it very difficult to take him seriously, and I find it very difficult to take anyone seriously who says that they don't like a genre, but they wouldn't read or watch or consume the media or whatever it is, because they hate that genre even though they have never watched it. It just doesn't make sense. And I also find it very difficult to take people seriously when they say that the movie The Shining was better than the book, but they've never read the book because the movie was good enough for them that they didn't have to read the book, but they know for sure that the movie was better than the book, even though they have never read it. That frustrates me, but yeah, I have a list of people I don't take seriously. Let me tell you something, and let's get this clear once and for all. The book, The Shining, is by far one of the best books I have ever read. And the movie, The Shining, didn't capture its essence at all. The miniseries, The Shining, captured it much better, but that, I think, was produced by Stephen King himself, and he knew what he was doing. I think I got off topic. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, why fun horror could be a good thing. I think it's a good chance to ease someone who isn't used to reading horror, to ease him into the genre. I spoke about Cannibal Creek the other day, and I speak of it a lot, I think. I should stop doing this. Anyway, Cannibal Creek, I would put in the hardcore horror section. And it was full of unnecessary details, and it aims at hardcore horror fans only. So if the director I mentioned earlier was to read Cannibal Creek or watch The Wrong Turn, which is pretty similar to Cannibal Creek, it would just prove him right. He would just freak out and be determined for the rest of his life that the entire horror genre is just disturbing and messed up. The family plot, on the other hand, was very lighthearted. Someone who isn't used to reading horror might get scared at some points, at some parts of the book, but I don't think it would give them nightmares. They wouldn't be so scared as to be discouraged to read anything else. in the genre. Fun horror books are, in my opinion, the best way to get rid of the stigma surrounding the horror genre, and finally get rid of the notion that they are messed up or whatever that means. Other genres can include disturbing scenes like the crime genre and psychological thrillers too. And I bet you there are some romantic thrillers out there with very disturbing scenes too. So I think it's time we get rid of this stigma once and for all. For the entire speculative fiction, I think even science fiction is perceived as not real fiction for some reason. It isn't serious fiction. So what is serious fiction anyway? It's just stories. It's made up stuff in a book or in a screen. I understand having a specific preference in some genres more than the others, but dooming an entire genre is totally unfair for the genre itself and for the authors who write in that genre. And the directors in the movies, you get what I'm saying. In case you're interested, other light-hearted horror books include, in my opinion, always, The Picture of Dorian Gray, The Haunting of House Hill, The Haunting of Ashburn House, Frankenstein, maybe Dracula, and I would go a step further and even put Carrie by Stephen King in this list of light-hearted horror. But if you've never read horror before, don't start with Carrie. Start with the more classics like Dracula and The Haunting of Hill House. So that's it for today. Next week, in 2 weeks from now, I will talk about another lighthearted horror story, The Haunting of Ashburn House. Unlike Family Plot, Ashburn House had a very, very good atmosphere. But we'll talk about that next time. Cheers!